Welcome to Real Rover. I'm your roving host, John Craig. Real Rover へようこそ、クレイグ・ジョンでございます。Introducing you to people you would never have heard of if it wasn't for Real Rover. Here we go.
Today's guest on Real Rover is Kevin Turner, MA, who's the Director for Asia of the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. He's a teaching faculty member and a field research associate for the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. He practices shamanic healing and is author of the book Sky Shamans of Mongolia, Meetings with Remarkable Healers. After years of study with yogis, monks, and lamas in India, Nepal, Southeast Asia, Taiwan, and Japan, Kevin met Michael Haarner in 1997 and began his shamanic path. Kevin has worked with shamans in Mongolia, Indonesia, Nepal, Peru, and Mexico. In 2007, he was invited to Mexico to train a group of Mayan elders in psychopomp work. That means the assisting of those who did not transition to the afterlife states well. He publishes his research in Mongolian, Balinese, and Nepalese shamanism in the annual Shamanism Journal and does regular presentations at the annual Foundation for Shamanic Studies Council meetings. Kevin has worked for Save the Children in Cambodia at Civil War, Airlines in Taiwan, IBM in Japan, and has lectured at a dozen universities. He was a residential facilitator at the Monroe Institute for over 12 years. Kevin has been a Kriya yogi since 1986, being personally initiated by Swami Hari Harananda Giri, the last living disciple of Sri Yukteswar in the original Karar ashram in India, as described in Autobiography of a Yogi. He has also received initiations and training in the Karma Kagyu School of Tibetan Buddhism, and though born in Arizona, Kevin has lived in Asia for over 30 years and currently has a shamanic healing practice in Asia. So let's get ready for a really thrilling interview, bringing us closer to the heart of what it means to be a shaman. So, Kevin Turner, welcome to Real Rover Podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
today.
you for having me on.
And I think I'd like to start with your book, Sky Shamans of Mongolia. Was that the correct term? Was it Sky Shamans and then underneath of Mongolia?
Yes, and Meetings with Remarkable Healers is the subtitle.
Meetings with Remarkable Healers. I remember I read your book about 3 years ago. I know it's been translated into other languages already.
Yes, French, Spanish, soon to be Portuguese, maybe German soon as well.
Oh, congratulations. So there is obviously a high interest right now. I think we could honestly say all over the world, there's a high interest in shamanism. There's definitely much more of it. There it is. Nice. Shaman Celeste, Sky Shamans of Mongolia. Well, in that book, one of the things that really impressed me was your description of a Mongolian shaman striking you with a whip at exactly the place where you had received an injury a long time before, which resulted in an instant healing, as I understand. So could you take us through where you were, what happened, and what was the result?
Well, this was an unexpected healing that came as a result of a conference I was attending. I was representing the Foundation for Shamanic Studies at a conference in Mongolia. I spoke during the day, other people spoke during the day. But at night, 4 shamans came in and I didn't know what to expect. But they started calling in the spirits, beating drums, burning various sages and things. And at one point, a Buryat shaman said, "Okay, everybody come here and line up." And she got out her whip and she started whipping people. And I thought, okay, well, I got to get in on this. So I didn't say anything to her. And she would probably say the spirit guided the whip. I had my shirt on. She couldn't see the scar on my back or anything. I wasn't limping. There was no indication of anything. And she let out a shrill cry and cracked the whip, and it fell exactly on the point of where I had a back surgery and have a scar there. And that was it. Boom. I had a big healing. And she grabbed me then and pulled me close and whispered some things to me, private messages, or the spirits did, in a raspy voice. And it came true.
So you understood what she was saying to you, presumably, and you understood at that point that you had been healed. Is that correct?
The pain disappeared. And so I didn't understand that second, but when I went back and sat down, it was gone. The pain was gone. Of course, an interpreter, when she pulled me up close and started talking to me, the interpreter came up here because I don't speak fluent Mongolian. So she was able to translate.
That's an extraordinary type of healing. I have heard of many different forms of healing around the world in different shamanic traditions, but I've never heard of using whip. So tell us a little bit more about what makes the sky shamans of Mongolia unique vis-a-vis all of the other traditions around the world.
Well, in many ways, I would say they're not unique. I would say that they're very much almost a perfect representative of a universal shamanism. But within that blanket of universal shamanism, I can easily say, yes, of course, there are some specialties among the traditions. There are probably 12 or 13 primary styles of shamanism in Mongolia, but 3 big ones. And they almost all of those lineages were cut during the either Buddhist persecutions and then later the communist persecutions. But they're coming back. They're coming back alive. The whip healing is not completely unique. Other shamans in Central Asia do it, but I haven't seen it elsewhere outside of Central Asia or Inner Asia, as they say.
I have absolutely no knowledge of Mongolian shamanism outside of what you wrote, and I was interested that even at the time you wrote the book, you were saying that shamanism is resurging in Mongolia after the repression of both the communists, as you mentioned, and the Buddhists. It was almost wiped out, I understood. And then came this resurgence. And I remember I was talking to a shamanic researcher actually in Japan, where I was at the time. And he said, yes, that is true. However, they're cracking down again. And that was about 3 years ago. So has there been another reaction against the resurgence of shamanism in Mongolia, to your knowledge?
I don't know recently, but I think that anytime you have spiritual autonomy, there's going to be somebody who wants to crack down on it. And so it's really hard to say. It was a bit of a free-for-all, as it was in much of the Eastern Bloc, what you might say, when the Soviet Union collapsed. Mongolia was released from the Soviet sphere, so they were pretty much on their own to do what they wanted. And they said, okay, well, shamanism can come back. It's legal. Buddhism can come back. So it was a bit of a free-for-all. Suddenly there were shamans just popping out of the woodwork, coming out of the rural areas, but also shamans going on TV, advertising, writing books. And so you can imagine that there were probably some scammer shamans, but there's a lot of real shamanism there, very powerful shamanism that is resurging.
Shamans on TV, that must have been hilarious. I can only imagine, like they're appearing with their whips. We can heal you in 2 seconds with this whip, probably because they knew that it could be done, and you're a living example of the fact that it was done. That pain has never returned. Presumably you were totally cured?
Almost, yeah. I would say 90%.
So how do you understand what happened that day? As a longtime practitioner, you're also teaching shamanism, you're writing about it, you continue to research around Asia, as far as I can see. How do you get your mind around what happened? How do you see that?
In this case, I would say that the whip was a tool to do a shamanic extraction. That I had a spiritual intrusion at the place of where I had surgery. And these are like parasitic intrusions. They're non-ordinary reality intrusions. We can call them bad vibes, bad energies, whatever we want to call them, blockages. And I think that the whip is used as an extraction tool in order to remove that. So many shamans will use feathers, others will use crystals. I often use a purba from Nepal, which is a kind of a ceremonial dagger. And in that case, it was the whip. Now, the most interesting thing about the whip is that it's almost completely guided by the spirits. I think the shamaness herself was probably unaware of what was happening, but she was merged with her helping spirits. So the spirits are the ones who guided the whip to exactly the right place, because she whipped everybody in a different place without knowing anything. So it was a simultaneous diagnosis and extraction.
Oh, this is a very interesting concept, because you used the word spiritual intrusion, I think, and you then said the spirits guided her. And that this intrusion could be bad vibes, or they would say in different places in the Far East that there was a bad spirit around you, or something like that. So this area where you had surgery had presumably allowed some kind of non-ordinary reality to access your psychophysical self and cause pain. And I'm sure that throughout time, humanity has had different ideas about what that is, whether it is an entity with a personality, or whether it's just a force that is not connected to any kind of intelligence, a dark energy, or whatever. Do you currently see that energy or that intrusion in a format, in a way that modern people could understand? Because a lot of people just can't even go there.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Yeah. Generally speaking, in core shamanism, we talk about spiritual intrusions, and these are non-ordinary reality things, and there are two types. There's a parasitic type, and there is the dart type. Now, darts are usually sent by other human beings. If somebody talks badly about you, or they're envious or jealous or angry, frustrated with you, whatever, they may send you a dart, and we feel that. We can say, oh, that person just sent me bad vibes. Now, if our power field is up, then we are not affected. But if we are tired, if we're hungover, if we're ill, if we're fatigued and our power field is down, then those darts can be quite damaging. The other type is spiritual intrusions, and these are non-ordinary reality. I could call them termites, mosquitoes, things like this. They're not the ghost of a dead termite, no, but these are spiritual beings. They are not evil, they are not bad or wrong. They're just trying to make a living, and they want to suck our energy. And so these shamans worldwide acknowledge that these non-ordinary reality parasites are part of the middle world that we are inhabiting right now, right here, this world, and that they will look for weaknesses and ways to get in so they can siphon off your spiritual energy. And if you have injuries, broken bones, places of surgery, places of weakness in the body, they will usually go there. So I probably had intrusions around the place where I had surgery in Mexico.
I see.
And so the whip removed that. Now, removing doing what we would call spirit influence healing, that is something different. That we don't call that extraction. That would be called something else. Spirit influence healing. That is when the soul of a deceased human has not gone to transcendent realms, but has remained here in the middle world and actually intrudes upon a person. Now, in core shamanism, actually, we sort of acknowledge the spirit influence as very, very common in the world. There's a lot of scary movies made about this, and those are mostly false and misunderstandings. When a spirit intrudes upon someone, usually they have no idea what they're doing. They're confused, they're upset. For whatever reason, they didn't go to transcendent realms, they remain here. They find somebody with a weak power field, and they want to taste that turkey sandwich with mayonnaise and mustard through their body, because they can't do that without a body. So they want to intrude. So often it's a family member that they'll intrude upon. The shaman can detect this, has to diagnose this, and then has to help the spirit move on, which is called psychopomp work or soul escorting. So then has to help the soul to realize this is not your body. You have intruded upon a living person. Your body has already passed. So let's go to a better place. And then the shaman escorts them to a transcendent realm. But the shaman needs to know the way there. So the shaman is known as a twice born or twice dead. They know the realms after death. So they can escort souls there.
When you talk about the middle world, give us some geography here. How does that relate to the other worlds?
The middle world is what we're in right now. We also call this the pain world, the illusory world, samsara. Some tribes call it the world of lies, which is a pretty severe one, but it's also apt. So then there is an upper world and a lower world. Different tribes can have different cosmologies, but just to make it simple, I work with a tripartite world, and very similar to Yggdrasil, the Scandinavian world tree. You have the Asgard, Midgard, upper world, middle world, and lower world. So in the cosmology that I work with, the lower world and the upper world are both transcendent realms, which means everybody gets along, everybody gets what they need. So we don't have any need for conflict in those areas. The middle world, on the other hand, is unfortunately doesn't have to be, but is mostly run by greed and fear.
Agreed. That's very interesting that I can understand the upper world being a world where everybody gets along, but I've never heard that the lower world is also a place relatively free of conflict. Is that a correct understanding?
Yeah, in the system that I work with, yeah. Lower world has been acknowledged by many shamanic traditions around the world, but because religions have taught, the so-called great religions have taught up is good and down is bad, this misunderstanding has come up. So shamans are less likely to talk about it. But shamans very often, especially in Greenland or other areas, they would swim to the bottom of the ocean and they would go to a world that is below. And it's not to the center of the earth. It seems like it, but they actually find a separate world, a different world. So it is actually a different frequency of existence. The Australian Aboriginal shamans as well, mostly they don't journey to the upper world much. They mostly journey only to the lower world. Not all. There is one tribe, I think, in the north central area that journeys to the upper world, but the others mostly journey down. And this is not down to a bad place. No, we're in the bad place. Sorry, that's the bad news. But the good news is we actually looked for hell once at the foundation. We thought, God, all these religions are talking about hell. There must be some hell place. So we looked for it, and guess what? We couldn't find it. We're already in it. However, there are areas of the middle world, what we call non-ordinary reality middle world, as opposed to ordinary reality middle world. Now, they are overlapping holographically because it's a frequency of existence. And so in these areas, and there can be a band on the way up and a band on the way down, where there can be many suffering beings who have died in the state of great fear or anger or attachment, and they may remain in the middle world after death, even though they don't have a physical body anymore. And those are the suffering realms. And you can go there and you can go to the realm of the angry people. And boy, it's really unpleasant. But like attracts like, so that vibrationally they move to the place where angry people go. If they're clinically depressed, they die. They don't go to all the way down or all the way up to get out of the middle world. Then they go to where the clinically depressed go. And it's a pretty dreary area. Now, shamans can go and heal these areas. This is what Jesus did after he died. The harrowing of hell, the cleansing, actually, the assistance of beings out of these areas. But if you keep going down through those hell-ish areas, nobody's being punished. It's just their own state of consciousness that leads them to be there. But we can help to assist them to come out of the trance of their own guilt, their own shame, their own anger, whatever the case may be, sort of like psychotherapy is right here in the middle world. Then we can help those souls move. But if you keep going down, then you get to these beautiful areas. And many religious traditions will talk about heaven and paradise as two different places, two different frequencies. And so I would liken this to the upper world is like the heavens and the lower world is like paradise or the happy hunting ground or the Garden of Eden. Very earth-like, very similar to physical life here, but no mosquitoes, no taxes, no lack. Everybody gets what they need. So people will choose to live in the lower world after death, sometimes for periods of time, especially if they want to live a little bit more similar to Earth-like life for a while, because the upper world can be pretty ethereal and pretty thin. And if you want to have a little more textual experience after death, you can spend time in the lower world. But again, in space, there is no up or down. It has nothing to do with good or bad. It's a different frequency of existence. And if you dig through the religious scriptures, you can start to see, okay, there are many mansions in the house of my Father. There are many levels. Now, Robert Monroe, for example, he placed the lower world in between the middle and the upper, just because he grew up in a Christian culture where up was good and he didn't want to think about down. But again, we're talking about frequencies of existence, not about actual spatial relationships.
Very interesting. That's very intriguing and makes a lot of sense. For example, the way you describe the lower world being very similar to here, but no mosquitoes and no taxes, is similar to the accounts of people who've had near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. And as you mentioned, Robert Monroe's multiple worlds that he went to out of the body seem to have a connection to that. But you mentioned he had a Christian background, and so he framed it in a different way. That they're not spatial, real places. They're vibratory, energetic states of consciousness, maybe. We can go into that a little bit later. Mm-hmm. But in your experience, so you studied with yogis, with lamas, with people who have these talents, and I believe you then found yourself in the company of Michael Harner. So tell us a little bit, going back now, how you started all of this.
Started from 4 years old. I was a natural, what you might call out-of-body experiencer, or out-of-body traveler, astral traveler, or what I would call now shamanic journeyer. So from the age of 4, I was regularly shamanically journeying or moving consciousness away from the body. Rather than out-of-body experience, I would even call it an awareness away from the body experience. Because our souls don't leave our body completely, or your heart would stop, the breath would stop, you basically your body would stop functioning. So some portion of the soul or some portion of consciousness is remaining with the physical body. I think as young children, we all did this in our deep sleep. We all journeyed, we had flying dreams and things, but we couldn't tell the difference between actual astral travel, lucid dreaming, and common dreams, or little dreams, as they're also known. So it took me a while also. Between 4 and 6 years old, I was continually initiated into how to remember and how to not forget what happened in those periods. So the spirits initiated me directly, mostly between 4 and 7. And so I retained those memories, lost it a little bit when I became a teenager. The hormones came in and I got kind of very locked into my physical body again. And then as I got into my 20s, it opened up again. And really, even though I first started studying architecture, I realized quickly that the only thing I could do in this life was really spiritual science. And so I immediately, I changed. I did a master's degree in linguistics. I came to Asia to study Sanskrit and Chinese. And I went to study with lamas and yogis, and later got into shamanism. So 37 years now in Asia.
So Michael Harner, for those who don't know him, was an important part of that awakening to your work now, your shamanic work. He himself was very influential. I remember decades ago starting to study this very interesting topic, shamanism, through him. And so you are now involved with a foundation. And is it correct that he began that foundation and you were appointed as the main person in Asia to run this foundation? Is that correct?
Yes, I'm the director for Asia, and I was directly appointed faculty and director by Michael Harner. I knew Michael for over 20 years.
Did he teach you directly?
Yes.
Tell us what he taught you.
Well, after having spent at least a dozen years, maybe 15 years already in Asia with lamas and yogis, Kundalini yogis, Tibetan lamas, I started to rediscover, in a sense, shamanism. And I started to realize that a lot of Tibetan Buddhist practices, one of the reasons I left Tibetan Buddhism was because I started realizing Tibetan Buddhism is about 90% shamanism with a little bit of Buddhism painted over the top.
That makes total sense.
And I mean, most of the most powerful initiations, the most powerful practices are directly from Central Asian shamanisms, either ancient Mongolian or ancient Tibetan, or in the larger Eurasian context, shamanisms. I learned of Michael Harner, and when I heard that he was going to be in Vancouver, which I think you're near there right now, I said, well, I have to be there. So I arrived, and the moment we met, bang, we hit it off. And I mean, we almost didn't finish the workshop because he and I were just talking and talking and talking. And he said, okay, wait a minute, we have to finish this workshop. So I went through the workshop. He taught me and many others were in the class how to shamanically journey to the upper world, to the lower world. How to do a power animal retrieval in the basic course. And I took to it like water because I had been an out-of-body traveler since I was a kid, and I had done all this work with the lamas and the yogis. But still, I was a little bit like, well, did I just imagine all that? What really happened here? Was I really merging with an animal spirit? I mean, was it really dancing my body? It felt kind of imaginary. I went home, and 3 months later, I had a major shamanic initiation within a big dream. Totally upgraded my entire spiritual circuitry. And after that, clairvoyance, healing ability, everything opened up. That was after 1 2-day class.
Wow.
I was totally blown away. And I thought, I called, Michael had given me his home number, and I called him up and I said, Michael, how is this possible? I spent 12 years with Kundalini yogis and lamas, and in 2 days, I have this initiation that doesn't normally happen to lamas for 20 years. And he says, yeah, well, you know, shamanism works so quickly, it's so easy that it's a little bit embarrassing.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm sure the viewers will, many will know that the history of shamanism goes back to the dawn of mankind. It's been with us all the time. And it's only very, very recently that it was the religious traditions of the world which, in a sense, took over, whilst imbuing themselves with a lot of the knowledge that came from shamanism. And your example was very potent. The Bon shamanism of Tibet forms most of Tibetan Buddhism. And it really is. Because, you know, my family in Japan is Shingon Bukyo, which is connected to that tradition. And there are just so many mantras and spells and ways of, in a sense, manipulating the dream world and reality that you just don't find in the other monotheistic religions. So there's a clear example of it. We've been with shamanism since the dawn of time. It does seem to be resurging now, but in 2 days, you had an experience in a big dream, as opposed to a small dream, where you were aware. Were you aware at the time that you were undergoing an initiation, or was it after the fact that you came to realize that?
I only realized it after I went through death, and then I believed I had actually died. I went through a physical death. And then I said, okay, well, this is my test. And I truly believed I was dead. And so I shot like a rocket straight up through realm after realm after realm after realm. And I said, hey, this is my test. You know, I mean, I'm not going to go back and go for a reminiscent tour of my old life. I'm going straight home. And then I appeared in another realm up there, and then I was completely dismembered. I was sawed apart, cut apart by these, I would call them mythological beings, but they were absolutely alive, 4 of them. But there was no pain at all, even though they were completely dismembering my body. And I thought, okay, this is part of the test to see if I'm still attached to a body, because I was still kind of programmed in my Buddhist thinking. I didn't realize this was a shamanic initiation called the dismemberment. So I was completely dismembered, completely dissolved to a point of only being part of an all-pervading awareness. No sense of I or anything else. Then suddenly I woke up back in my bed, and I was completely revivified. I was completely cleansed. My psychic circuitry had been altered and changed. And then after that, I was much more easily able to perceive spiritual intrusions in others. I could do diagnosis. Probably I always could, but this time it was clearer. So kind of blew open the channels, you might say. And I've never been the same. So these shamanic initiations continue, and the spirits continue to upgrade the shamanic practitioner so that the shamanic practitioner can contain more power. And in this case, I mean spiritual vitality. I don't mean power over others. The more power that a shaman can contain, the more the miracles increase, and the greater clarity in the divinations. So this is the whole shamanic path. It's actually very long. It doesn't happen in just 2 days normally. It's a 20-year path, like any profession. If you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, whatever, if you've done that for 20 years, you're considered to be a knowledgeable professional. It's the same with shamanism. After 20 years of practice, you could be considered a knowledgeable professional.
Very interesting. So that dismemberment process that you described is something that is more known about thanks to the writing of many individuals, directly or indirectly, on the subject of shamanism. We find ourselves in this middle world now in a very tricky position. We could put it that way. Your description of the middle world seems very accurate. A world of chaos, contradiction, power over others, pain, suffering, very little harmony, despite having all of the technological advances, and especially in the 21st century, just about everybody can eat and survive. How do you, as a shaman, see this middle world now?
Mm-hmm. I see it as a fantastic school. It's a training center. It is interesting that we could easily recreate the Garden of Eden here. There could be a minimum of conflict and a minimum of shortages. We have solutions to most of the problems here, and yet we don't apply them. Again, greed and fear tend to be the ruling things. But also here in the middle world, we have very contracted states of consciousness. Most of us are very contracted around the physical body, contracted around our family, contracted around our ethnic group. And so we are unable to be empathetic and sympathetic with others. What contracts consciousness is fear. Whenever you get afraid, man, you're contracted. And then you've got to guard and boundaries and fight or flight. When you feel love, when you feel compassion, when you feel joy, then all of a sudden there's this spreading, there's this connecting, and you want to actually share that with others. This is the natural state of being in the transcendent realms. We can make this world like that one, as above, so below. So the goal in this spiritual training center is, to the best of our capacity, is to bring heaven into earth. And in this sense, the vibration of it, not literally that space, but the vibration of that place. And so whenever you're around saints or sages, that kind of peace, love, connection, natural empathy, natural ethics, when you're around those beings, you're in a very powerful field of consciousness. Those saints, those sages, they have, in a sense, succeeded in being able to pass that to others. That's an advanced stage. There are not very many of them in this world, but they do come. But we are all in training. We are all in training to become that.
So at this stage in your training as a shaman, I know that you teach. Tell us a little bit about how you teach and who you teach.
Mm-hmm. Well, I see my primary, I do a lot of distance healing. I do shamanic healing. Many miracles occur. As any shaman would say, it's not me, it's my helping spirits. So the shaman is the intermediary between intelligences of much greater love and power, but the shaman is the boots on the ground that enable these powers to work through them. So that's a beautiful part, but I feel that my job now I'm in my 60s, is really to produce more shamans. And so that's what I do through my 3-year training. We call it a 3-year course. It's actually 6 weeks. We meet 2 weeks every year for 3 years. And there's, of course, training and practice in between the meetings. And that is a series of shamanic initiations to increase the power capacity of a shamanic practitioner. So that's the most advanced work. However, the 2-day courses still can be very powerful. So I teach also a series of 9 2-day courses, which is preparation for the 6-week course that's spread over 3 years. At the end of that, I think a shamanic practitioner can say I would say they have a very sound understanding of shamanic practice and have probably been upgraded a few times by the spirits by that time.
And yet there is this very old idea that the shaman is called to do this work, usually, traditionally, by some kind of display of incredible endurance, strength, survival of almost certain death, that they are, in a sense, chosen. But you are saying that people can actually be trained during this period to understand the fundamentals of shamanism
And practice.
But would you agree that there are like 100 people may come to any course, and I know this from my own experience teaching remote viewing over a long time. Everybody can understand the fundamentals of how it works. And I know you do remote viewing, and you've been connected to the Monroe Institute, so you may concur that any human being can remote view, can experience other times and spaces as an individual who is still aware of being here, not in an altered state. And yet, out of 100 people who graduate, it always seems to me that the 20/80 rule or something like that applies, that there will be a small group of people who really take it and move with it and develop it, and therefore become the next generation of practitioners, while the rest will feel, okay, I know that it can be done, but it doesn't really fit with my life. Has that been your experience with your graduates?
Exactly. In the 2-day courses, I would say anybody can come to, especially to the first few 2-day courses. They can practice, they can get an understanding. But shamanic talent is exactly like music. everybody can learn to plink out some kind of a tune on a piano or some other musical instrument. Anybody can learn that. Same with shamanic journeying, same with some basic shamanic divination techniques, basic shamanic healing techniques. But I would say only 20% of the people who take the 2-day courses are going to go on and really practice this full time. And I would say probably only 10% of those will apply to the 3-year program, and only part of them are accepted. So the people that I take into the 3-year program have already been vetted, and they are already only maybe 5% at best of all the students who have taken the whole line of courses. So in the same way with music, everybody can learn music, but only a few are going to be motivated, talented, have the right environment to produce, a world-class shamanic practitioner. Joe McMoneagle would say the same thing. You can do training and remote viewing. Everybody can do it to some degree, but you're only going to have about 1 in 200 will be a world-class remote viewer, no matter how much training they do. So in that sense, the traditional shamanic illness, for example, is a very typical way of hearing the shamanic calling. If a tribe, one shaman's getting older, typically a grandchild or a younger person in the tribe will turn up with shaman's illness. They get ill. There's no reason that they're ill. They can't diagnose any kind of, no medicines work. They get ill. They have some kind of a near-death experience, some kind of crisis. They come out of it, they recover, and then the shaman recognizes this person will be the next shaman. They train them, the old shaman dies, the new one is there. So this is the ancestor spirits of those tribal groups usually will make sure that there is another shaman to take the reins. But we live in a modern world, and actually we are desperately short of shamans. I mean, we're nearly 8 billion people. And thanks to the Vatican and Stalin and Mao, most of the shamans were murdered or died in the gulag somewhere. And so we've got to produce more shamans just to get up to par. So I would say the people who find my courses and who find this, they are already called to it. And after 4, 5, 6 2-day courses, they're going to know whether they have that calling or not. And if they don't feel it, the spirits will make sure that they do. At a later time.
So let's tackle this challenging concept, the spirits. How do you understand the spirits at this stage in your career?
Okay, it's very interesting because a lot of spiritual persons will say, well, why do you work with spirits? Why don't you just work with the power of God or the power of Buddha enlightenment? And that's fine. There's no problem with that. Conceptually, there's no issue. Shamans will also talk about unity consciousness or great spirit. However, if you look at the esoteric traditions within all the religions, and you got to dig a little bit, they all have hierarchies of angels, hierarchies of spirits, hierarchies of Buddhas. Even within Buddhism, they'll talk about the typical Buddhas, the middle management Buddhas, the super Buddhas. Hinduism has a very great gradation of spirits and deities on different levels, and each of them have a different power capacity. And that power capacity, you keep moving up until you get to the peak, which is the unity consciousness. That would be where a being can actually contain the power of the creative source and still behave ethically and compassionately. That's an extremely highly developed being. Now, we could say that all of this separation is an illusion, just like Buddhists say there are no Buddhas, there are no deities, there is no ego, there never was any separateness between any of us. Well, yes, but we can philosophically say that, and we may even merge with that temporarily. Unity consciousness, then suddenly we're back here and it's like, oh, I'm hungry, I have to go to the toilet, oh, I got to pay the rent. Okay, well then there's these little middle world realities to work with. So shamans will work with these hierarchies of spirits as their power capacity goes. Now those spirits are also in their chain of development. So if you look at the Western system, they'll talk about angels, archangels, archai, Elohim. I mean, there are always these categories of spiritual beings. Working with these hierarchies is easier rather than, for example, sticking my finger in the sun. I don't have the power capacity to deal with the power of the sun immediately. The same as I don't put my toaster plug directly into a power plant. I have to have step down transformers. So human beings also feel more comfortable to work with beings that we are familiar with. So usually people will perceive the angels, the spirits, as human-like. However, there are also others that appear animal-like, especially guardian spirits. Guardian spirits typically appear animal-like, and that's why children are so in touch with animals. Children are in touch with their guardian angels until they go to school, and we train them not to be. So that's why kids love to hear stories about animals. Kids love to make animal sounds. Kids love stuffed animals. They want to hear, and if you tell a story about the fox said to the crow, said to the bear, said, and they're just, yeah, and then what? Because they're still in that place where they're in touch with those animal spirits, their guardian spirits.
Well, that was very, very well encapsulated. It reminds me of Dr. David Hawkins' landmark book about the different levels of consciousness and how the power level dramatically increases as the level of consciousness raises. And you may be familiar with it's called the map of consciousness.
Yes.
It goes from 0 to 1,000, and the 1,000 is the place of the unity consciousness, where as a human, the most powerful place that you can imagine spiritually, whereas 200 is the level where people will actually break through into an up spiral, an evolutionary spiral, because they have courage. And below 200, you have pride, you have fear, you have angst, you have shame, all of which have very low levels of power associated with them, and makes it very difficult for them to get enough courage to break through to the upper spiral. So what
Yes.
you've said totally syncs with that.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes a lot of sense. Okay, I want to go from 200 to 1,000 tomorrow. Well, that's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Not in the middle world. You're going to have to go through the intellectual development and the scientific, logical left brain world to understand this dimension here until you get to 500, which is love. But that doesn't get you to peace until you get to 600, which is thousands of times more powerful. And so the spirits that you talk about, I would understand from my own background as levels of consciousness with associated power and energy that any individual can access. But it's not easy. It's not easy when you're paying a rent and you're afraid and you've got all of these chemicals going through your body. And on that interesting word, chemicals, I get the sense from our communications so far that within shamanism, you have the traditional methods of getting into altered states, drumming, chanting, for example. But when you go down to Central and South America, you find more shamans are using plants. So a lot of people now are beginning to associate shamanism and altered states and spirits with the taking of substances. And you mentioned the unity consciousness, and now a lot of people, for example, in Mexico, are going to a center where they can have bufo experiences, smoking the crystal extract from the gland of a frog.
Yes,
which
5-MeO-DMT.
Exactly, which takes them to all intents and purposes, it takes them all to unity consciousness. Here's God now. And I know some of these people, and 5 weeks later, they're back in the middle world trying to pay the rent. So that is kind of a warning,
Yes,
in a sense, that there really isn't a shortcut, that all of those shamans using those incredible plants had to go through incredibly long initiations themselves to get to that point. And this we often forget. What's your view of, let's say, the two camps, one using the plants, the power plants, and one not?
about 90% of shamans around the world use sonic driving to alter consciousness. About 10% will use some kind of plant teachers, Amanita muscaria in Siberia, for example, other things. Except with the exception of the Amazon, the other traditions that did use some kind of drugs, so to speak, or plant teachers, used it only temporarily as a way to break open the head, so to speak, as a way to see, for example, as a way to perceive, to learn about spiritual perception. So if we go back to Castaneda and Don Juan, for example, Don Juan didn't give Castaneda drugs every day. He only did it a few times to break his perception open. And once he was able to perceive non-ordinary reality, all the plant teachers were unnecessary. Now that was that tradition. Now I know in the Amazon, they drink ayahuasca every single time they do anything. It's very rare that they'll do anything without ayahuasca, but those are the ayahuasquero tradition. But Michael Harner found, I have also found, I've been in the Amazon, I drank lots of ayahuasca too. I found sonic driving to be clearer, cleaner. You can keep the intention of what you're doing. Michael's take on things was that ayahuasca is a middle world spirit, and it has its own agenda. It is not all compassionate. So we only need to look at the battling Amazonian tribes who actually, they all drink ayahuasca, they fly out of their bodies and they go to kill each other. Now, what kind of a spirit supports that? Is that a transcendent spirit? Transcendent spirits don't support that. They just withdraw. And so, you know, I don't want to down anybody on ayahuasca or any of the plant teachers. I learned a lot from mushrooms, from LSD, from other things, from Amanita muscaria, etc. But I don't need any of it. I can go to all those realms directly with sonic driving.
When you say sonic driving, Kevin, are you talking about drumming?
Drumming, rattles, click sticks, singing, bells, using sound to actually change the brainwave state. And so that's, of course, what we do at the Monroe Institute. I was a residential trainer there for 12 years, involved with them for more than 20 years. And so it's basically two different drum beats in the ears. It puts the brain into a whole state, and then you're able to go explore directly. I think that the drum beat is even more freeing because you then are guiding it rather than the unique recipe of binaural beats that's in the CD. But it's a great way to get started. So psychedelics is a great way to get started. Binaural beats are a great way to get started. But eventually we want spiritual autonomy. And to me, when I see somebody who's constantly having to go back and drink ayahuasca, constantly having to go back to get their 5-MeO-DMT ego crash hit, they're not getting transformation. They're getting just visits. As Ram Dass used to always say, it's great to visit Christ, better to become Christ.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's pertinent information right now from somebody who knows, because you've been within the shamanic tradition for most of your life. You've had a very rich array of experience that you're now passing on to others. There's a great interest in shamanism, but of course, being modern people, okay, I'm going for the quick one. The bufo. The bufo. It's only 10 minutes, but I'm going to go down and I'm going to get one with the universe. Yeah, and then you have to come back and deal with your girlfriend. And so it is very pertinent information, and you know, I would like to continue this discussion because there's so much to develop in this field of shamanism. But I hope from this interview with you, Kevin, that people will get a more grounded understanding of what it involves, of how they might be able to get a framework to understand it in this incredibly materialistic culture that just denies it. Even the religions deny it. They've denied all the shamanism out of something that was very, very rich. So there is a resurgence, but we have to be careful. So tell us about something that's coming up on your calendar soon that people might be able to participate in.
Well, I'll be teaching in Bali again in June and July, and hopefully there will be a full schedule of classes going. A new 3-year program is beginning in May, but that one already has a waiting list. So I'm starting another one in October. But there are prerequisites and there's an application process. Anybody can register for the 2-day courses, but there's an application process for the advanced training because we want to make sure that you are really ready for that. Michael used to teach it very intensively and used to kind of bring everybody in and found out, well, not everybody's ready. It's very, very intense. And essentially it's going to change everything about who or what you think you are. And so just as with psychedelics, you know, people can have different kinds of reactions. Some become very spiritual, others go off the deep end in another way. So we go very slowly. Esoteric schools throughout history have always gone through things slowly. I would even say secretly, not because it's a big secret, but rather because there's a limited number of persons who are ready to move to that point.
Yeah, that's the reality. It's not a democracy out there. It's much more of a meritocracy where it really depends on individual courage to be initiated, individual intent, and everybody is different. And to respect that takes time.
And the key word really is love. It's compassion. When the spirits sense your compassion, they know you're ready and they will transform you. They will move you along that path. And as shamanic power grows, compassion and ethics has to grow with it. Because if you have high ethics, high compassion, then you just become a bleeding heart and you become a pincushion. And we've probably all met and heard of psychic healers who burn out because they pick up stuff from their clients. Well, you got to have power. That's where the spiritual vitality comes in. But if you have all spiritual vitality and low compassion and ethics, then you got a problem. Then you get a sorcerer. Then you get power, well, Darth Vader, so to speak, you know.
Yeah.
Lot of psychic power, very low compassion, very low ethics. They got to come together.
I think that's an excellent place to end our first discussion. A sober warning, in a sense, how these must be in balance. And for anybody who's interested in finding out about your work, where should they go?
Well, go to my website, www.shamanism-asia.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shamanism.
Those articles there's one article at the shamanism.org, which is the main San Francisco website, called The Miracle of the Ropes. Very interesting article. I'll send it to you later.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I thank you for your time, Kevin. I hope we can do this again and develop a deeper understanding of what shamanism really is all about. And so on that note, I will say good day to you, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.